think we'll get started. We're for my watch a few minutes behind, which is no problem. And I think we've got about 30 some odd people in the room or in our session, which is great. So thank you all for joining. The idea behind this session is to really present intrapreneurship. What is it? How does it work? And then really to spend most of our time chatting largely with Saidah and Grant, who are, all of us have been entrepreneurs. Grant is an active entrepreneur in the public sector. Saidah and I have both been entrepreneurs in the private sector and are now out of that space, but we're still working with entrepreneurs in a variety of ways. And so that's the idea, is a little bit of theory, very little, of sort of what is entrepreneurship, and then we'll discuss sort of what that journey looks like, how we've experienced it, and would really love to hear from all of us, from you all, sort of course, questions, but also your own experiences. And so, that might be, a little long to type it up, but would love to bring that in. So, please, as we're going along, type in your questions. Fiona's very kindly pulling those together for us. If we're lucky enough to have a lot of engagement and the chat gets really long, we've got a side document where we're trying to capture those. So I'll try to moderate to bring in those questions, but I'm going to be very loosely moderating because these two are phenomenal, and I don't want to take up more of their time. So my next feat is to share my screen, which should be. All right, we'll just do this. Here we go. So hopefully you all can see that. Essentially what I'd love to do, and this is exactly what I just said. So we'll start with a bit of kind of the what and the why in terms of a definition of entrepreneurship, talk about our own journeys, and then have a discussion. So hopefully quite free flowing, and we'll spend most of our time in a discussion mode. Very quickly, my name is Justin DeKoszmovszky. And I thought it would be useful to share a little bit up front of sort of my background, and then I'll ask Saidah and Grant to do the same as they launch into their sort of stories, if you like, in our second half, or third. I started my career as a strategy consultant, so quite classic strategy consultant working in tech, and this was during the first .com boom, so there's a fair amount of e-commerce work as well. And then got quite frustrated with that. I enjoyed the intellectual challenge. I enjoyed the pace and the scale at which I was working as a consultant. But the work I was doing, the impact I was having was very empty, and not how I wanted to spend the rest of my days. And so that's where I started looking at bringing business and sustainability together. Then through a variety of lucky and sort of somewhat random acts, ended up at SC Johnson, and that is where I really became an intrapreneur. So I was in the fast-moving consumer goods company. SC Johnson, if you don't know it, is the company behind a lot of brands like Mr. Muscle, Scrubbing Bubbles, Toilet Duck, Off, Raid, Baygon. So in the cleaning categories and in consumer insect control as well. So really did a lot of work with them as an entrepreneur, and I'll share more on that later on. And then moved from there within SC Johnson and also to other companies like Puma and Ovo Energy, focused in this intersection of strategy, innovation, and sustainability. And that's really, I think, where I've found my sweet spot, but with a focus on precarious markets, on micro and small business, and how companies and especially large companies, but large organizations as a whole, can work with the micro, the informal, and small business more effectively for much more positive impact. Today, I do that primarily through two organizations, Archipel, in which I'm a partner, and we're an inclusive business accelerator agency. So we work with companies and foundations and nonprofits and social enterprises to accelerate the transition to an inclusive economy. And also with the League of Intrapreneurs, which is how the three of us, Saidah, Grant, and I, know each other. And that organization is essentially a global community of change makers working on the inside. So I'm already seeding the idea of what an entrepreneur is. And what we do with the League is really just try to support each other very much supporting one-on-one, and that support can be more sort of right brain support in terms of tools and tricks and connections and classic networking, but also emotional support and a variety of other things which we'll talk about are necessary in the life of an entrepreneur. So that's my background and where I'm spending most of my time and where I'm coming from. So I guess take everything I say with a bit of a grain of salt, knowing this. So to get into what entrepreneurship is, this is sort of the definition, if you like, that the League uses. So it's someone working inside an existing institution, can be a private sector, public sector, and social sector, doesn't matter, but inside an institution and developing innovative and scalable solutions to sustainable development challenges. Those challenges, I think, are very well codified in the SDGs, but certainly can go beyond that. And essentially, I mean, the obvious comparison is with a social entrepreneur, a term that most of us are now very familiar with, but an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur working inside an existing organization. So there are quite a number of skills and capabilities that are different from the entrepreneurs, but that mission-driven, purpose-led aspect is very much the same. So that is sort of the League's definition. Very similar, this is a definition from a recent study from Unit Social Business. It was called Business as Unusual. I recommend it. And here they focus a bit more on the employee aspect, on the sort of the private sector aspect, but it's very, very similar. These are several others which were part of a report in unlocking the potential of corporate social intrapreneurship. And this was more a look at some of the scholarly work in that space. So it's something that is getting traction, and a lot of these are very similar. It's about working inside organizations for positive change. I think that's sort of the shorthand, if you like. This is a quick word cloud that came out of some work we did a while ago of a lot of the various things that are related to entrepreneurship. And I think some people sometimes say like, but isn't entrepreneurship the same thing as leadership? And to that, I sort of say, yes, and absolutely, it's what I think leadership should look like, but it is somewhat distinct. And so we've found a lot of value in defining it and in working and supporting it as a distinct way of operating, but it is absolutely related to, and sometimes could be interchanged with a lot of other ways of creating change, right? So being a change maker, it's in some ways it's being an engaged employee. It's leading, as I mentioned before. And so I think there are a lot of aspects that we're talking about on a regular basis that overlap with entrepreneurship and that have parts of entrepreneurship embedded in them. So honestly, I don't spend a lot of time on the vocabulary. I don't think it particularly matters. I think that the concept really is helpful. I think there are also really importantly some mega trends behind why entrepreneurship is becoming more popular and why we're hearing about it a lot more that are worth just mentioning quickly. First and foremost, and this is sort of in the bottom right of this Venn diagram, the overall and increasingly headline grabbing sustainability and systems challenges that we're facing require entrepreneurship. They require people who can work inside our incumbent institutions for change. The need for innovation and entrepreneurship, but that innovation component, even inside major organizations, and the statistic I have here is from the private sector, from the S&P 500, where 20 years ago, the average age of those was 60 years old, and now it's 20 years, right? The average company in the S&P 500. So the rate of churn and of innovation and of change happening inside major organizations, and the need for a capability set to really manage that change and drive that change is ever rising. And then lastly, and at the top of the Venn diagram, there's a major challenge around talent in the 21st century. And what does leadership look like? What does a job look like in the 21st century? And this is an aspect, I think all of these have been massively impacted, as everything else has, by the COVID crisis. But to my mind, this talent and 21st century leadership aspect and sort of the future of work, if you like, is one that has been massively accelerated. And I think we're going to see entrepreneurship as something which people are internalizing as they've been at home and have realized, like, wait, I don't have to work in the same way. I don't have to clock in either metaphorically or literally the way I used to, and I can actually own my own work a lot more than perhaps I did before. So these are some of the mega trends that I would argue are part of what's driving entrepreneurship in a big way. And we see this across a variety of areas, but employee activism is something that is on the rise, absolutely. And these are just some of the headlines from various relatively recent articles of kind of this employee activism component. And I see entrepreneurship as very much a related topic. We also see entrepreneurship as significantly more in the mainstream, or starting to become more of a mainstream topic in terms of the way people are seeing change happening. And that's where it came out of. It came out of some research that was done on how are companies shifting towards sustainability. And Maggie Dupree, who founded the League of Intrapreneurs, did that research and found that, yeah, this type of actor inside organizations is quite often the sort of perhaps the spider in the web, if you like, that is really making things happen. And that continues today. Again, these are recent headlines. I think the other thing, as I mentioned, the sustainability drive and entrepreneurship is not the end-all be-all answer, but it absolutely is part of what is going to bring us towards delivering the SDGs, and especially bringing our organizations towards being a part of positive change, as opposed to, as they have been, and some continue to be, actually trying to keep the status quo and reduce the amount or the rate of change. So I think entrepreneurship is critical to achieving SDGs. To put it visually, entrepreneurship is people working in the extreme in a place like this, but working again in the extreme in a way like these folks do. So if you're a visual thinker, and the typed up definitions didn't help, I think contrasting, this kind of activism and mission drive and purpose, but with a fair amount of strategy and courage, of course, behind it, but applied in these kinds of spaces, metaphorically speaking. That is essentially, for me, what entrepreneurship is. My personal definition, also a little bit lighter than perhaps the more academic ones I shared previously, is hacking the corporate profit motive and utilizing the powers of corporations in the service of sustainability, equity, justice, purpose, and importantly, for fun. I mean, this is something which I think, when I speak with entrepreneurs, and when I work with entrepreneurs, either as clients or simply just trying to help them out, the aspect of caring about what you do, you have to keep it fun, because if it flips over into a massive Herculean burden, it becomes unsustainable at a personal level. And then we might talk a little bit more about some of that personal work that has to happen for entrepreneurship to be possible. But this is my personal definition, if you like, of entrepreneurship. So with that, what I'd love to do is stop sharing my screen and ask maybe Saidah to begin with just giving us a bit of, absolutely an introduction, if you would, and then, yeah, tell us a bit, maybe perhaps starting with sort of what your personal definition of entrepreneurship might be, and then, yeah, your story and how you worked as an entrepreneur and some of the challenges you may have found and successes you had.
Sure. So thanks, Justin. Hi, Grant, and thanks for joining today, for being here with us. Saidah Nash Carter. I am an American based in Cape Town, South Africa, which is where I'm calling in from today, and have been a long time entrepreneur. Sometimes joke I'm a recovering corporate executive. I spent 20 plus years in Thomson Reuters, which is a large global professional services media company. So we served bank agents with the knowledge and information they needed to do their jobs better. And so when I think about the definition of an entrepreneur or entrepreneurship, I loved your language around sort of what hacking the corporate profit motive. I think that's really at the core of what it is. But I think it's also, and sort of, or it's a yes, and I would add to that, this idea of being inside of an organization, and because you're inside, you really understand how it works, what motivates it, what the climate is inside, and what levers to push and pull when to get things done. And I think that's pretty core to how and why entrepreneurs can be successful. And then they push and pull those levers in a way that that helps the company to realize that they can stretch in new ways, right? They can stretch their DNA into directions that may not be immediately obvious, may not be directly aligned with business as usual, but can use the resources and skill set and capabilities in ways that have positive impact, and in ways that are not so far from how they normally do things, and too far from BAU. So that's how I would define it, and how I think about it. And I think it's absolutely critical to have these individuals inside organizations thinking about their own business differently, and helping companies and organizations to think about differently as well. And this is not be denied. So I apologize. She just keeps coming back. So yeah, okay. So that's my definition. My background in entrepreneurship, as I say, sort of spans most of my career in corporate America, frankly, in one capacity or another. I think probably started in the earlier days of my career there, when being on the team, I was on a team that founded the Black Employee Network at Reuters. And that was in the early days of companies beginning to think about diversity and inclusion in new ways, beginning to think about how to integrate it into an HR function more formally. But it was still quite grassroots at the time, and so really needed the employees that represented that difference, or represented that diversity, to sort of drive the agenda. And we were a team of like 3 or 4 Black employees. There weren't that many at Thomson Reuters at the time, and there still aren't that many, sadly. And yeah, so I think that was definitely the beginning of my sort of taking my space, leveraging my network, and realizing the agency that I had as a person of color inside of the organization to affect change within the organization. And then a number of different roles, of course, was more of a volunteer. And then that sort of energy around how can I help the company be a better itself began to sort of permeate most of my work, even in my professional capacity. So fast forward a number of years, my most recent role, my last role, I should say, at Thomson Reuters, I've since left, was heading up innovation across sub-Saharan Africa for the firm. And that was a bit of a journey, in large part because Africa, as a strategic place to really invest resources, time, attention, was not really on the radar as the company was thinking about strategic or emerging market investment. And so there was quite a bit of work that I had to do inside the company to explain why Africa, right? Why Africa over some of the other emerging or frontier market opportunities that may have seemed more obvious or easier to tackle. But ultimately, that championing that I did over the course of a couple of years, really, in concert with others, right? So I think that's the other thing that we know as entrepreneurs, is that you really can't do anything on your own. You need a strong network of partners, friends, co-travelers, collaborators inside of the organization. And even externally, great to be able to partner with customers and other partners as you push agendas forward. But those are absolutely necessary to get anything done. And so when I say I was championing, Africa within the firm, I was not doing that alone. It was definitely as a part of a large kind of drumbeat that I may have been leading, but certainly was not the only one in the drum. And ultimately, that resulted in the commitment to launch an innovation lab in Cape Town, which is what ultimately moved my family and I here about 5 years ago. And that lab my lab was the only lab in an emerging market. So it was quite exciting for me and phenomenal as a result to have that commitment for the company sort of manifest. And then we were able to, not only while I was here, but even before I moved to New York, do quite a bit of great work, again, sort of pushing that, stretching that company DNA, as I like to call it, in new ways, thinking about leveraging, for example, our expertise in financial services and data aggregation, analysis, insight extraction, et cetera, leveraging that in a way that would be relevant to and valuable to the African context. So one of the flagship projects that we began, I began in New York actually before even moving, and then ultimately was able to accelerate once I got on the ground here in Cape Town, was a project called Bankable Farmer. And that project was very much focused on figuring out how to surround the farmer, and, pull sets of data about the farmer, about the farm, and then ambient sets of data that the farmer really had no direct impact on, but pulling all that information together to design and create a risk profile that would allow traditional institutions to lend to these farmers. So anyone that knows this space knows that most of the financing that happens for smaller commercial farmers within the sub-Saharan African context usually comes from microfinance institutions. The traditional banking sector is not engaged at that level, but because of that, there's a massive gap between the credit that's needed and the credit that's available. And so what we thought and what we were focused on doing at Thomson Reuters was trying to close that gap by bringing traditional finance and traditional banking institutions, leveraging the Thomson Reuters brand, leveraging the already provide data and information solutions to these banks that they trade on and make decisions on every day. And so it was, again, to that end of stretching the company DNA in new ways, financial data, extracting data, providing data to customers for them to be able to make decisions on, which was core. But what we weren't doing at the time was providing those insights in the African market and providing those insights to a demographic that frankly probably needs it most. And so that was my corporate entrepreneur, or certainly a part of corporate entrepreneurial journey, and some of the work that I am frankly proud of. Today, as I mentioned,
we're going to have to make it quick, sorry,
Reuters,
so we can get to Grant.
Okay, cool. So today I left Thomson Reuters about a year ago, founded a boutique advisory firm with my partner, Jackie Curitan, called Bright Insights Global, and we're continuing that sort of effort to support entrepreneurs and to support business more broadly and stretch their DNA in ways that have more of a positive impact, specifically within the African context.
Cool. Thanks, Saidah. Thank you very much. That's an incredible journey. Grant, over to you. introduction and kind of, yeah, a bit of that background on your journey. And then I've got a couple of questions. I see some also popping up, so we'll jump into discussion after that.
Yeah, certainly, and I'll be brief. My name is Grant Ervin, and I serve as the City of Pittsburgh's Chief Resilience Officer. It's great to be with Saidah and Justin. And Justin, I really appreciate the slide deck because it basically helps me shape kind of what the heck's been going on with my life for the past couple of years, I think. So I feel almost like I'm on the psychiatrist's couch, and now I have like a bit of clarity. It's interesting. So I come, just a quick bit about my arc is that I come from a community activist background. So my first kind of positions out of university were based in community development and served as a community organizer for an organization called the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group, where we worked with 25 neighborhood organizations and 15 financial institutions on what here in the U.S. is called the Community Reinvestment Act. And it was in those kind of places and spaces that I was really learning the engagement with people and their needs on the, kind of the ground level, and how to shape that power in order to move institutions really as an external force, and transition that information into kind of a more statewide context for about 9 years with an organization called 10,000 Friends of Pennsylvania, which here in Pennsylvania advances sustainable development practices. And very much kind of a same kind of mindset, where I kind of took that kind of community activist organizing capacity and led that into a series of kind of what I'll call skunk works types of activities, where we worked within state agencies as well as outside of state agencies to change public policy, and to formulate capital to solve infrastructure and land use solutions at the community level. And building on that, I was asked to work with our now current mayor, William Peduto here in Pittsburgh, who asked me to put together some of that same type of community and sustainable development thinking as part of his campaign. And I developed a really thoughtful 15-page white paper on sustainability in the city of Pittsburgh and things that we can be doing. That was great. The problem was that 15-pager became my job description when I was invited to come to the city of Pittsburgh and start to tackle these different aspects of sustainability, both from an internal aspect. So the city of Pittsburgh, for folks, is much like a small to mid-sized company where we have 3,000 employees and 1,000 fleet vehicles and 300 facilities. So much like some of the large multinationals that you guys are a part of, it's an institution. It is not nimble, and also has those responsibilities not just of the internal operations, but also 305,000 people in a 2.5 million person region. A responsibility of investing in infrastructure that impacts the environment. So we shaped kind of an internal and external program that has allowed me the ability to kind of work with both folks inside of local government as well as partners in the NGO sector and the private sector and universities, really to advance kind of fundamental environmental change. So taking kind of that external advocate and putting it internal to an organization is kind of what creates that intrapreneur, I think. So it's the restlessness of the status quo is something that we cannot contain ourselves with it. So you see kind of challenges and opportunities, and the natural inclination is we got to fix this, we got to make it better. And I really lend a lot of that kind of insight to actually a board that I used to chair and a former mentor of mine around the concepts of servant leadership. So this aspect that the pyramid doesn't look like this, but it looks like this. And that inverted pyramid is really where the leader has the ability to help serve others around them. And that's been a fundamental kind of ethos, I guess, in the sense of my practice. And with that, what we've been able to do, just like you said, is hearing kind of the about your journey. Like, you're never on this journey alone, right? And you have these kind of partners and fellow travelers that come along with you. And for me, that has been one of the fundamental components of it, is to not just take sustainability itself, but start to lend other aspects, whether it's the deeper engagements around social equity, or also fundamentally for us, the adoption of a resilience practice as well. So really thinking about risk mitigation and shocks and stressors, or the slow moving challenges and immediate negative shocks that individuals and organizations are affected by. So putting that lens over our work has really helped us, I think, integrate a number of other travelers into our sustainability journey, because we're now a part of an innovation ecosystem. We're a part of an entrepreneurial mindset, and then also bringing on other institutions. When you were talking about the SDGs a little bit there, Justin, it was making me think too about our work in the SDGs. So Pittsburgh is going to be one of the first of 4 cities that will be releasing what's called a voluntary local review, which was pioneered by a friend and colleague of mine, Alex Hinniger, who started in New York City, very much an entrepreneur herself. We need to get her to sign up. Where she started in New York City and now is at Carnegie Mellon, kind of advancing this practice of taking the 17 SDGs and shining a light on the institution's operations compared to them. And so we've been a part of that as that network as the city of Pittsburgh, to do that introspection. And what's been really fascinating about it is it's really helping us to foster cross-department collaboration and communication, as well as cross-sector communication and collaboration. And I think that's really kind of, when I think about some of the definitions that we've had about entrepreneurship, it is that ability to kind of move with agility across departments and sectors and to find these fellow travelers, because they're out there. They're all looking for kind of systems change in order to help, improve, whether it's their community, their city, their organization, etc. Oftentimes in response to these tectonic megatrends that you're talking about, right? In the resilience space, and just to kind of wrap up, we look at under our Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities platform, we talked frequently about the issues of urbanization, globalization, and climate change. These tectonic plates that are constantly rubbing up against one another. And much like kind of the mega trends that you outlined, I think it is kind of the confluence of all these things coming together that is really making the time almost necessary to have more entrepreneurs, right? Because otherwise we're not going to be able to adapt our 20th century systems to 21st century challenges. So we need these kind of new organizational structures, really, I think, to help advance progress.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for that. So we've got a few questions, and there's a bit of a theme in the questions and around how does one create a culture of entrepreneurship, and one from Andy around, I think, also sort of structure, compartmentalizing entrepreneurship, but sort of structuring for entrepreneurship. And I know, since both of you have worked on the inside of organizations as that's being your scope of change, as well as looking to change, the external activities of the organizations, maybe just talking a little bit about that question of how does one help within the organization make entrepreneurship more possible and sort of more fertile ground for entrepreneurship, and also helping entrepreneurs who are already there and already inspired and trying to do this, do more of it. Any thoughts on that?
I have a couple of quick ones, actually. One of the things I think that's really helpful, one is to acknowledge the role of leadership. So whoever is at the head of the organization is a very important a very important character in the play. You know, and I lean on, you know, our chief of staff and our mayor, obviously, are people that have allowed us to have this type of creative and innovative thinking. I also look at our residents. One of the things that I had the pleasure and privilege to be a part of was the mayor's first transition team. And we took, you know, instead of, you know, the old school 30 people in a smoky room, we had 1,000 residents who came together over a couple days to kind of, you know, talk about ideas and concepts, and we formulated that into kind of the transition plan. Many of those aspects of which were laid out by citizens have subsequently been implemented. And it was because of that you're able to parachute into an organization and take those ideas and work with them, which also requires you, I think, to have, you know, in government, it is a strong civil service. Those are many cases the people that kind of move and have the muscle memory of the machinery, so kind of understanding how to work with them and how to learn with them. And one of the key aspects that, you know, I've kind of adopted and, you know, my team's been working on is a turn of phrase that we've kind of created called drill down to drawdown, which is taking on kind of, if folks have read the book Drawdown, which is a collection of climate solutions, they just don't happen by reading the book. And so one of the key things that we have taken the time to do is to educate and to help empower, you know, the architects, the engineers, the folks that are a part of that machinery about how and why these, you know, policy choices not just are important, but how do we actually implement them? And that is, I think, one of the key challenges that we're in right now is trying to build that capacity from the bottom up with, you know, a lot of the professional services, frankly, whether it's the you know, I mentioned architects, but also like the accountants and the lawyers. Like, why is this renewable power thing important? You know, like, don't we just turn the switch on and pay the electrical bill? Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, and we're going to need your help to change the system. You know, so that's a really important challenge that's confronting us right now.
Cool, thanks, Grant. Saidah, thoughts on that?
Really, in terms of how to support entrepreneurs on a very basic and individual level. If you recognize that someone inside of your organization is pushing for positive change, just support that person. The more successful they are, the more wins they have, the more the organization will recognize that and empower more to do the same. So I think that is something that everyone can do. If you see someone, you believe in a project that someone's pushing forward, do what you can to support them. The more successful they are, the more people will be able to do similar work.
That's a great point. Yeah, that comes down to that individual aspect, I think. So just to signpost for folks, the League has done some work looking at this in particular with support from USAID and with partners, Business Fights Poverty. So there is a report that was released, I believe, in 2018. I may have the date wrong, but it was looking at the ecosystem for entrepreneurship. And it identified a lot of these same themes. And really was sort of those people aspects of how you hire, how you train, how you inspire people to do that. And certainly Grant was and Saidah talked to that. But also, where does power lie? Who is allowed to take a risk? How is failure dealt with? And then overall, what is the purpose of the organization? Has the organization itself codified a purpose beyond, you know, in the private sector, beyond profit? Usually in social and public sectors, that purpose is clearer beyond, you know, tax revenue or fundraising. But in the private sector, we've been in a situation for decades where profit was sort of the only question that was asked, right? And I think a lot of organizations are doing that work, and those are key components to making a more fertile ground for entrepreneurship. And I think, Saidah, you touched on something too, which is entrepreneurs have to be delivering on the, you know, it's you sort of you've got to be doing the thing you're in your organization to do if you're going to then try to do extra or more. And I think all three of us were able to eventually craft jobs where the core of our role was positive change. But all of us started somewhere else. All of us were working on the periphery and trying to figure out how to make that happen while we had to deliver the business as usual type stuff too. So that's something else to really keep in mind. If you are an entrepreneur, don't be careful about taking your eye off the kind of business as usual ball, because that's how you're earning your ability to make change, your ability to rock the boat is to continue that analogy, by being a good crew member, if you like, and delivering. Great. And so there was another one around some of the conflicting forces that have been part of perhaps your own journeys, but also from an organizational perspective. And this is a question from Esther Loy around why organizations might be leery, or what are some of the challenges for organizations as they have more entrepreneurs coming in, either because there's a new generation, because we're all realizing the critical nature of the situation that we're in as a species on this planet, or simply because someone got convinced by us and launched something, but now the organization might find some challenges. So what are some of the things that you've experienced that need to be managed for at an organizational level when entrepreneurship starts to come in?
I think the biggest pushback that I've found is concern that what we're going to do new or differently is going to fundamentally undermine the core business. And so by doing it differently, by focusing on a different type of customer, or by approaching things in a new way, they're going to miss the numbers. The revenues won't be what they need to be, and I think that's often been the biggest pushback. And I think that's certainly perspective, this very sort of short-term type of view, and the earning cycles that everyone's under. You've got monthly numbers to hit, quarterly numbers to hit, and anything that looks like it might slow that train down in any meaningful way is seen as a problem. We used to call it sort of like the corporate immune system would kick in and immediately sort of freak out as a result of trying to do anything that wasn't exactly what business as usual looked like. And so it's that getting around that corporate immune system and carving out spaces that allow for people to experiment and to think differently. And then ultimately you do have the right leadership, to your point, Grant, so that when the tests are done and the experiments are run and you have a proof of concept that works, pulling that back into the systems and the processes that govern the overall organization works is important, and that is the real work. That's the hard work, but it's the work that has to be done in order for the true transformation to happen, and to happen at scale, right? Because it's fine for innovation teams to sort of like be playing at the edges, right? But the edges is not where the change is really going to have the impact.
Great point.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I think I had to give pause for a second there, because I think about in the government side, the challenge isn't trying to hit. I mean, there is obviously kind of revenue and generation that needs to happen, but the challenge is often that if the system disrupts the residential expectations or the residents' expectations. And the one, just as Saidah was talking, made me think about was our environmental services department, which does recycling and refuse collection. So if that system, of daily activity of going to the curb, picking up waste or recycling, putting in a truck doesn't happen, a whole host of things behind it or in front of it get disrupted. So it's like literally like a supply chain disruption, or kind of if somebody misses a step in the dance, you can see it come out of sort. And in a sustainability capacity, we're always trying to find ways to enhance that. Whether it's creating more fractions and improving the collection stream, or finding new uses for materials. Like, this is the stuff that sustainability people just go gaga over. And if you're the head of our environmental services department and he sees me coming, he he kind of goes the other way, because he knows that hey, Sean, I got this idea for you. He's like, Grant, I don't want any more ideas. Like, I just need people to pick up bin, put in truck, and, go to the next house.
Yeah.
So it's finding ways in which to, help support kind of their innovation in many cases. How can you make their job better, easier, more convenient? So it's finding kind of those, the places of mutuality that exist in those relationships, so yeah. I might not get everything that I dream of, but I'm trying to help move the process forward.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I think you both touched on something which actually kind of in your both of your answers to the variety questions. I think there's an aspect of intrapreneurship where you understand where the power in the organization lies. And that could be both internally, in terms of maybe it looks like the top of the pyramid, right? It's the leadership, the traditional leadership, but it might also be someone who simply is very influential in the organization, and that, and therefore you can use that knowledge wisely. But also external to the organization, where does power lie, and what are those critical kind of deliveries where that if that customer were to call or tell their account representative, I heard about this, I think it's great, that's going to trickle through the organization. Or in your case, Grant, if the bins don't get picked up, like, that's critical. So I think part of the answer to how you do this, and Vicky had a question in terms of like, how can young staff inspire leaders for more intrapreneurship? I think one of the ways is to understand those elements and understand how the mission you have, and this is certainly something that I employed when I was at SC Johnson, and I would essentially kind of get dropped into a country team whose job was like sell more stuff through supermarkets, and I wanted to come and build a toilet cleaning model or run a malaria program, and like you, Grant, they were just kind of like, oh, this is just more headache. Why is this guy here? But the key was to understand, what were their KPIs? What were those numbers that they were trying to deliver? What was that critical element they had to do? Otherwise, it was literally, they're fired. And then make sure that what you were bringing to them, or the approach that you were taking in that context to deliver your mission, was going to help them deliver that. And that's how you pitched it to them. And so I think it's understanding where power lies. It's understanding those critical pathways, and then bringing that together in support of that positive change that you're trying to push forward. I think that really is the sort of subtle art of intrapreneurship. And that's, I think, the slight difference between social entrepreneurship, which I mentioned at the top of the discussion, is that social entrepreneurs, and I bless every single one of them, and I'm glad they're on this planet, but they are not in that big organization where they have that to understand that. They might be working in an ecosystem and understanding that, and working very intelligently to navigate it. But the intrapreneur's sort of secret sauce is that power play and that ability to navigate internally and get things to happen. And to your point, Saidah, the hardest place to get things to happen is at the core of that organization. They'll let you play on the periphery, but when you want to do stuff at the core, understanding those power structures, understanding those critical elements, and playing with them, and actually using them to do what you want to do and need to do is critical. Yeah.
How much for you guys has been about team building, or kind of particularly in like an ad hoc, or even in like a formal way of that, where these dots need to be connected, and just being the convener? Is that a large part of your roles?
Certainly that was for me, and I think it continues to be even in kind of my practice today. A lot of what we're realizing at Archipel, we're working with companies, organizations to make inclusive business happen, which is generally a different way of approaching things. Mm-hmm. Those clients who are working on their own are really struggling, is when we can bring other partners in, and Saidah also mentioned kind of external partners, and that actually creates a longer term thinking and a bit of security, if you like, for that initiative, because you have these other players, you have more people trying to move the ball forward. So it hasn't been necessarily, I mean, for me now, it's not team building. I mean, there's team building for my own team, but you know, with clients, it's more about kind of creating ecosystems and helping them understand the potential of the ecosystem that they're operating in for partners and for that kind of support. That's really key. But
yeah, no, I
Saidah, you guys are doing, sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say, you're doing some really interesting work, also linking diaspora, Africa, US, that maybe is somewhat relevant in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, to your question, Justin, about building teams and sort of expanding that to include just collaboration on projects. I mean, that's absolutely critical. Certainly has been in my experience and in my career. That the more you get more air cover, the more clients, partners, other sort of allies are at the table. It's certainly inside of a course, you can bring a customer along that journey. You have far longer runway to invest into a commitment because they're you. And you with the voice of the customer. So I find that as a also as a mechanism or a tool to push projects forward as so it's not only helpful, but in some instances is the way that you can get it done by bringing in the right. And yeah, Justin, to your point about the diaspora group that we convened in New York, that group is cross-sectoral group of professionals based in New York, but hailing from the African diaspora who want to sort of bring their expertise and resources to bear in focusing on inclusive business and economic empowerment for the continent. And we're certainly much stronger as a collective than we could ever be individually pushing that agenda forward.
Absolutely. Thanks. Well, I think we are about 1 minute away from time. So I'm going to conclude with just, you know, thank you, Grant. Thank you, Saidah. Thank you, Saidah's cat, for joining, for sharing your experience, and for giving some insights into how entrepreneurship works, and certainly how both of you are moving forward intrapreneurially to deliver the future that we need. I'd encourage anyone who's interested. There's more of this kind of stuff via the League of Entrepreneurs, and certainly happy to reach out to me personally. I love this stuff, so happy to chat. But yes, huge thank you, and thank you to the Siegel Family Foundation for setting this up and having this platform to discuss. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great being with you guys, and thanks everyone. This is lots of fun.